These days, there's one thing that Raquel Campos isn't taking for granted: water.
Some days with water, some days without.
Back in January, the taps went dry in her apartment in Mexico City. She'd turn on the faucet and nothing. At first, she thought it was just her building.
But then we realized that all the city was facing the same situation. Of course, I'm very worried because, water is essential. If there is no water, schools will be closed, offices will be closed, restaurants, all the services will be closed.
Usually, Mexico City's weather is pretty mild. The average temperature hovers in the mid-60s, and the rainy season stretches from May to September. But now, those normal trends are out of whack.
For the past few years, actually, with less rainfall, more drought, warmer temperatures, Mexico City just recorded its hottest day on record in May. It hit 94.46 degrees Fahrenheit.
Kasia Batel covers weather and climate for The Post. And when she saw that Mexico City was getting far less rain this year, she knew a water crisis was building. Then came this dire warning.
I heard about this thing called Day Zero.
Mexico City, one of the world's most populous cities, could be just months away from running out of
Mexico
water.
City, as the region is on its way to hit Day Zero in the coming months.
It's being referred to as Day Zero, and experts warn it could happen in June.
They said by June 26th, the reservoirs were going to get so low that one day when people turn on the faucets, there was going to be no more water for them.
June 26th. That is tomorrow. To be clear, it's not certain when or whether this will actually happen. This water system is really complicated, and we're going to get into all that. But this fear that one of the critical reservoirs for this major city could run dry, that fear is not going away.
Mexico City is our example here, but it's not alone. We have so many cities like Mexico City around the world. Growing populations, urban sprawl, hot climates, dependence on a water system that maybe isn't suited for today's needs.
From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Martine Powers. It's Tuesday, June 25th. Today, how the largest city in North America found itself on the brink of running out of water. We'll hear about one family there dealing with water cuts and what other cities can do to prepare for crises like this. Kasia spoke to my co-host, Elahe Azadi. I'll let her take it from here.
Can you just briefly introduce the family who you met in Mexico City and introduce them and how the water crisis has been affecting them?
I went to one of the wealthier neighborhoods in the city, and I met this family who was having water issues. I met Raquel Campos and her husband. They live in this nice condo along with their kids, their dog, and their bird. What's your bird's name?
Luigi.
Cute. They've been staying in that condo apartment for about 18 years, and they've never experienced water issues until now. For them, the water issues first started out with a message from their building manager saying, hey, the city hasn't delivered water to us in a bit.
He sent a message to everybody and said, we haven't received water for 4 days.
And they're like, okay, water levels are going to get low here, so just ration it. And then the city didn't come with the water, and then things just kind of snowballed to eventually they turned on their faucet. There was no water coming out of that faucet.
We thought that eventually water will come back, and then it was Monday, and it never came back.
Then when it did get refilled, there was water, but it was at very, very low pressure.
It took 1 week, and it was very, short amount of water.
With low pressure, no?
Yeah, with low pressure, and not all day long. It was only a few hours.
So the water issues for them was literally a lack of water in their faucets.
I mean, that's kind of crazy. You've been living in a place for 18 years and you turn on your faucet and water's not coming out.
And especially where they were living. Unlike the outskirts, they are able to pay for private trucks to bring in the water. And that's what ended up happening to Raquel and her family. They ended up spending money each month to bring in more water so their condo building could have water.
We always have water.
Oh, I
But
see.
that is because we can pay. I can imagine other persons or families or neighbors that cannot pay, and they might be facing a very difficult situation.
Let's back up, and can you just explain how Mexico City's water system works and why are these shortages happening?
People in Mexico City, they usually get water from one of two sources. One is called the Cutzamala system. And it's this system with a lot of canals and tunnels, reservoirs, but mainly it's from a lot of surface water. And that supplies water to about a quarter of the city. The remainder of the city gets it from underground water, pumping water underground. Now, the system that is in question here that's tied to this day zero is the Cutzamala system. That one has been dwindling. Now it's at a historic low. In the month of June, it's been at 27 to 26% capacity. And the reason that this has happened is because of actually many years of issues with climate. Really, really hot temperatures that are happening. Mexico as a whole has warmed about 3 degrees Fahrenheit since the pre-industrial era. But if you go to somewhere like Mexico City, which has the urban heat island effect, with all that concrete heating up and so many people, it's about like 5 to 7 degrees hotter just because of all of that. So that makes all that surface water evaporate and makes it less available. They've also been getting less rainfall in the past few years, like 2022 and 2023. We were also in an El Nino pattern recently, so that also brought hotter conditions to Mexico. But on top of all of these things, they also have kind of faulty infrastructure. For instance, 40% of their water gets lost through leaky pipes.
40%, that's almost half.
Yeah.
I know math.
Yeah. I mean, it's surprising when you hear that statistic because you're like, that seems like such an easy thing to fix, right? But it's actually quite expensive. It's been doing that for a long time. And because Mexico City is so old, it's not an easy problem to solve, to like dig it up. And then you have to do it in portions. And it would take a long time and a lot of disruption to fix all of that.
Kasia, can you tell me a little bit more about how this is impacting people who live in Mexico City? I know you've mentioned that the effects are not uniform. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that and what are people's lives like depending on who they are and where they live?
Yeah, the effects are definitely not uniform across the city. And in fact, they were never really that uniform. A lot of times the outskirts of the city, which were more rural and, sometimes poorer, they experienced the brunt of water issues, water shortages, water quality. But now with these issues, the people in the wealthier neighborhoods are also experiencing this. Now, the difference here is that the wealthier citizens, they can afford to pay for a private truck to come and supplement the water that they need, whereas other people on the outskirts, they can't. So
what do they do?
Oh my gosh, I talked to this one family who the mother said they don't get water every day from the city. The city actually only turns on their water twice a week, Friday and Monday, from something like 1 a.m. to 6 a.m.
Just during that window?
Yeah, on Friday and Monday. And when the water comes, they wake up and they have to fill up buckets with that water and then ration it throughout the week until the water comes again.
So, Kasia, you had mentioned this idea of day zero. How close are we actually to the point where that could happen? This idea that the system will fully run dry, and what will people do when and if that happens?
So what happened was, with all these climatic factors, the management, the infrastructure, all of that led to really low levels in this Cutzamala reservoir. So to prevent water supplies from dwindling too fast, they reduced flow to a lot of the homes, which is what we see with Raquel and her husband who lived in that wealthy neighborhood in Mexico City. So because they've been reducing water flow, day zero, they said June 26th, to say that water is not going to be coming out of your faucet at all, that's a pretty strong claim. The authorities have tried a lot to prevent that from happening, and they are at the beginning of their rainy season. They have had some rains so far, but even if they don't hit day zero now, and I don't think that they will hit day zero, the rain doesn't fix the problems of adaptation to a changing climate or leaky infrastructure or poor water management.
After the break, how Mexico City and other parts of the world are trying to tackle these big water challenges. We'll be right back.
So Mexico has elected a new president, Claudia Sheinbaum. She is going to step into the role in the coming months. She used to be the mayor of Mexico City, and as she is preparing to step in as president, it just raises this question for me of what has been her approach to water and what has she said going forward.
Yeah, Claudia Sheinbaum is a very interesting case, too, because she is a scientist. She is an environmental engineer. This is what she studied. She was an author for the IPCC report, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. And that year she worked on it, all those scientists actually won the Nobel Prize for that. When she was running for president, the fact that Mexico City was having these water problems was used against her. Opposing candidates did say, you call yourself a scientist, yet you let this happen in Mexico City where they're facing one of the worst droughts. If you can't even fix your own city, how can we trust you with the country?
How did she respond to that?
In a rally on May 20th, this is what Sheinbaum said.
Nadie podía contemplar que eso iba a ocurrir en la ciudad.
We couldn't have seen this drought coming in such a way. And while that is true to a certain extent, the IPCC shows where drought's becoming more common. We know what happens when the atmosphere does get warmer. We know how rainfall patterns are affecting certain regions. That even if you couldn't anticipate it to this extent, we know that climate adaptation in these vulnerable regions, and by vulnerable, I mean it's a hot area with a lot of people. I think the climate adaptation here is apparent.
So, Kasia, what are officials in Mexico City doing right now to deal with this? And I'm wondering, what do they have to say about the situation and how they're handling it?
One solution that officials in Mexico City are proposing and doing actually is digging more wells underground, which pumps more water from underground. And like I said earlier, 3/4 of the city gets water from underground. So it seems like, that seems like a good solution, right? We don't get it on the surface, go underground. Not exactly, because we have this phenomenon called sinking or land subsidence. And it's literally you're pumping water from underground that the land is actually sinking beneath your feet.
Oh, wow.
And I write quite a bit about land subsidence around the world, and usually it's like kind of small, right? It's like, if it hits like an inch or two, you're like, wow, that's a lot. But it's a little subtle for someone to see. When I was in Mexico City at the city center, their cathedral, their national palace, the historical city center, it was so clear that some of the buildings were wobbly, the foundations were wobbly.
So, okay, not digging underground then for more is a viable solution. Are there any other plans being put forward, or what is preventing this problem from being fixed beyond questions around, or maybe even inclusive of questions around weather patterns and climate change?
So before she got elected, when they were talking about water plans, I do know that Claudia Sheinbaum talked about limiting water for agricultural sectors and then perhaps also using less fossil fuels, making more of an energy transition switch to renewables. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like she might completely neglect, fossil fuel, natural gas, that kind of stuff that kind of put the world essentially in this position in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
I did talk to a congressman. He pointed the issue, at least for infrastructure, you need money. And the money to fix something like the leaky pipes is what he said was more than what the government could probably give.
Mm-hmm. Kasha, I don't know how much we can compare Mexico City to other cities around the world, but I do wonder, are there other cities experiencing water shortages right now, and how are they managing that?
Yeah, as the world gets warmer, we're increasingly hearing about water issues. Right now, Bogota, they are also under water rationing. Since April, their reservoirs did go up a little bit, so it's not as bad, but it's still not a good scenario where you're still worrying that our water supplies are lower than normal. There's also Delhi in India now that is also experiencing some water issues. So a lot of the water issues that we see today, they are these big cities with big populations with needs for better water management. A few years ago, we heard about this Day Zero in Cape Town, South Africa, and that ended up not happening, but that was kind of the poster child for Day Zero. When we talk about Day Zero, we remember, Cape Town might run out of water as well, and they got out of that.
Good afternoon, and some good news in this water crisis. Cape Townians have today managed to bring public water consumption down to its lowest level yet. And we're now using 500.
And again, I think some people attribute that to good management and engineering, rationing the water use and making it so they can extend the water that they do have for as long as they could, which is what Mexico City was trying to do by reducing water flow from the Cutzamala system.
Mm-hmm. Also, the idea of Day Zero is a thing that sounds so scary. And I wonder if there's something to that idea of this could happen, but we really need people to kind of freak out and take this seriously.
Day Zero sounds very alarming, right? Is this a tactic to get people to perk up and pay attention? I don't think it's necessarily overhyping the water crisis, that something needs to be done. And if you don't fix it now, it is going to get worse. And even if Mexico City doesn't hit a Day Zero, tomorrow, it's going to be a problem they're going to keep facing along with a lot of the world.
Kasha, this situation sounds so dire, and it also sounds insurmountable in some ways. And it makes me wonder about the family we heard about from earlier. Are they worried about the future? What did they have to tell you about that?
When you talk to Raquel and her husband, they were saying they are not okay. This is not okay. This has affected their lives.
But I think that also everybody hopes that this won't be forever, that this will eventually be solved. But honestly, I don't know how authorities are planning to solve it. We need infrastructure. So
they told me that their son is very passionate about these issues. They told me that he blames them for the problems.
But in general, like pollution, water, he says that our generation is responsible for what is happening.
How do you feel when you say?
True.
Oh, yeah.
Not only us, but our parents, for sure. No, we were exploiters and depleters of many things, no?
Like a generational thing, like you guys left me, that sort of thing, like you left me all this.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
So it's a good example, like you said, the generational differences in how this younger group is very impassioned about what is coming up and how to fix it and the adaptation that does need to happen.
Kasia, in your reporting, after you visited Mexico City and just in other reporting you've done, are there any solutions or anything being done that give you a measure of hope? Or is this just the trend line in cities around the world?
I mean, there's a lot of good climate solutions out there. Some of them can be quite expensive, where it's talking about desalination of ocean water and making that a usable source. Some of it can be as simple as just rainwater harvesting. You know, one thing I got from this is how precious water is. I think when you don't have something or you take something for granted, you really appreciate how special it is. And I saw that when I was there. Like Raquel and her husband, and other people that, I talked to on the street and stuff, I did feel a sense of we care about our water. And I think having this idea of a day zero or having these water issues creep up, it pushes people to get authorities to take their water issues more seriously and to come up with a more sustainable way.
Kasia, thank you so much for joining and sharing your reporting.
Thank you for having me.
Reporter Kasia Patel covers weather and climate for The Post. She spoke with my co-host, Elahe Izadi. Today, there are a couple other stories that I've got my eye on. First up is Julian Assange. The founder of WikiLeaks has reached a tentative plea deal with the U.S. government, a move that could bring an end to his years-long international legal saga. Assange burst into the American public consciousness in the 2010s, when WikiLeaks began publishing bombshell disclosures, hundreds of thousands of secret U.S. military documents, and confidential diplomatic cables. Here's Assange in 2017 talking about a trove of CIA hacking tools that were uncovered by WikiLeaks.
This is a historic act of devastating incompetence to have created such an arsenal and stored it all in one place and not secured it.
In 2019, Assange was charged and imprisoned in the UK for violating the U.S. Espionage Act. His case became a transatlantic tug-of-war that pitted national security against press freedom. Now, according to new court filings, he is expected to plead guilty to a single felony for obtaining and publishing these government secrets. But then, he would return to his home country of Australia and be freed, having already served prison time in Britain. We've also got some news from Israel. On Tuesday, the country's Supreme Court ruled that ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students must be drafted into the Israeli military. This ruling follows years of controversy over the role in Israeli society for the ultra-Orthodox, who make up more than 12% of Israel's population. Ultra-Orthodox political parties have also provided crucial backing to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in exchange for their exemption from the military. But with Israel's war in Gaza, the Supreme Court justices said they can no longer be exempt. That decision could lead to the collapse of Netanyahu's ruling coalition. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. If you're looking for the latest updates on the big news of the day, check out our morning news briefing, The 7. We bring you through the 7 stories that you need to know about every weekday morning by 7 a.m. You can listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts. Today's show was produced by Emma Talkoff. It was mixed by Sean Carter and edited by Monica Campbell. Thank you also to Mary Beth Sheridan, Maria Gabriela Martinez, and Luis Antonio Rojas, who contributed to this reporting. I'm Martine Powers. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from the Washington Post.